Welcome back to the Global CISO Forum. I'm still your host, Amber Pedroncelli. Thank you so much for joining, and thanks for all of your great questions in that last session with Keith. Next up, we have Amber Vanderberg. Two Ambers running the show today. Amber is a multi-award-winning international business person, keynote speaker, and founder of the Pathways Group. She is the only female elite football coach for the Adidas Game Day Academy and the Paris Saint-Germain Academy. Today, she's speaking on how to communicate more effectively. Take it away, Amber.
All right, thank you so much for having me here today. So we are going to get started off with a couple of different games. So first, this is a phrase. Now I'm going to put it up to the camera. Now it is a phrase that says one thing on the screen, but I want you to try and figure out what it actually means. So it says, we could, we itch. Now this is actually two words. It's a bit of mad gab if anyone's played that game before. We could, we itch. So if you can figure out what that word could be saying, we could, we itch. It's trying to actually say something else. And once you figure it out, you can go ahead and put your answer into the chat. Get your mind thinking quite a bit this morning. All right. We could, we itch. It is in light of October. This is actually saying wicked witch. We could, we itch. Here's another example. We have wander her womb hin, wander her womb in hin. See if you can figure out what that one means. Sometimes it helps if you say it a few different ways. And try and figure out what that one actually means. Have the chat open here. So wander her womb hin is wander her womb hin. It's actually saying Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman. All right. Now we're kind of getting in the scheme of things. Let's try one more. This is our last one. Let's see if you can figure it out. Now this one is our most challenging one. I'll give you a hint. It is a form of communication. So we have newspaper report. Newspaper report. Newspaper report. See if you can figure that one out. Newspaper report. Once you have it figured out, if you want to put that in the chat, figure out what that one means. That it actually stands for newspaper report. You know, we see this happen in our communication within teams all of the time. It feels as if one person is saying one thing, and they're saying it very confidently. They're saying, wander her womb hin. And you say, okay, what are you trying to say? And they say, wander her womb hin. And they're actually trying to say Wonder Woman. And we see this happen within our teams all of the time, where we're speaking with one department and they're saying one thing. We're speaking with another department and they are saying something entirely different. As stated before, my name is Amber Vanderberg and I am the founder of the Pathways Group. And today we are going to talk about the art of communication and how you can communicate more effectively to share your message effectively within your team. Today, within the nature of our audience, we're going to talk specifically about how we can maximize our communication to minimize the risk within our organizations. Now, the first thing that we have to do whenever we are looking at our communication is we must begin by analyzing our audience, right? We must begin by doing an audience analysis. So many times whenever I work with teams, we find that the disconnect in communication doesn't necessarily lie within the content of the message, but in actually the audience analysis and communicating our message in a way that meets people where they are at. That's actually been a theme of the Pathways group throughout this year, is meeting people where they're at, as we have some people that are virtual, some people that are in person, some people that are hybrid. Even this event was going to be in person, and then we made it virtual. So here we're seeking to meet people where they're at. Specific things that you might be looking for is the culture. You're going to look at if it is relevant to the person, right? So is the message that I have, is it relevant to the individual, and how much do they need to know? We look at the relationship. If this is someone that I have a close personal relationship with, then I'm going to communicate my message a little bit differently. If this is someone that I have a very formal relationship with, let's say there's some tension within the relationship, then I need to assess my audience and alter my message accordingly. Other things I might look for is the personality within the team. So is this someone that is going to have a lot of follow-up questions? Is this someone that is going to really be contest the nature of my message? See, in all of these situations, the first thing that I really am going to look for whenever I have to communicate something in terms of security or in terms of my workplace, is I'm going to look at this baseline knowledge. Okay, I'm going to look at the baseline knowledge. Just a fun story. A couple years ago, I actually had the opportunity to go scuba diving in the Andaman Islands. So that's a small island group across the uh, peninsula of Thailand. And so I went with a group of people. Many of us had been scuba diving before. The only two people who hadn't was myself and one other individual. And so the master diver took us and they shared how to use our scuba equipment. This was great. So we learned how to use our scuba equipment. We learned all of the safety rules. And then we got on the boat and we drove out to the middle of the ocean. And it was at that point that the master diver discovered that the other person, not myself, but the other person that was being taught how to scuba for the first time, didn't know how to swim. See, there was an assumption in the baseline knowledge that the individual knew how to swim. And so we jumped straight into how to use the equipment. And so by the time that we got out to the middle of the ocean, the individual was not set up for success. And sometimes we see this whenever we are explaining or whenever we are helping to inform our team members about certain aspects of our information or of the message that we want to get across. And so I'm going to, of course, look at the relationship, look at the personality, look at the culture, and that can be the geographic culture, the organizational culture, and then also the culture within the specific team or department. So there's a lot of different factors that I'm going to be intentional to look into as I am doing my audience analysis. Now, you might be thinking, Amber, audience analysis many times happens in a split second, right? So for this meeting, I had several months to prepare, or I had a couple months to prepare. And so I had time to look to see who my audience actually was. But many times, whenever you're going into a meeting, you might only have moments to do a quick assessment of who is actually at the meeting. And so I break it down into two simple questions. Again, there's a lot to consider and it can be very overwhelming. And so I break it down into two basic questions. So first, I ask myself, what do they know now, right? So what is their situation right now? What is their knowledge? What is their emotion? Where are they right now? The second question I ask is, what do they need to know right now? Right? What do they need to know right now? We were working with a team a few months ago, and they were dealing with a massive, massive security breach, and the C-suite did not know much about what exactly was going on, and so there was a lot of miscommunication between the people that were helping with the security breach and the C-suite. And what we found is that there was an intent of over explaining what was going on, when in reality, the C-suite just needed to know the basic information so that they could make an informed decision moving forward. They needed to ask the question, what do they know now, and what do they need to know now? Right, so we're simplifying this very, very easily. All right, let's go ahead and give an example of that. So one thing that we begin with is the audience analysis, and that is part one of a really four-part sentence in breaking down effective communication. So Dr. Mark Rutland is a brilliant communicator, and he is a leader, has been a leader of several organizations, and he writes that whenever he is communicating to organizations, he finds, and to individuals, he finds that great communication boils down to four aspects. And if he has hit the mark on all four aspects of his communication, he has effectively communicated his message. But if he's missed the mark on even one, then there is a disconnect. Oftentimes there is a disconnect between his intended communication and the perceived communication. And so the first is doing a right audience analysis. So he writes that great communication is the right message delivered to the right audience in the right way at the right time. So I begin by identifying, who am I actually speaking to? Am I speaking to the C-suite? Am I speaking to the entire organization? Am I speaking to my direct team? In all three situations, we can have the exact same message that we want to deliver, but we're going to have to alter our delivery methods accordingly to meet our team. So what do they know now? What do they need to know now, right? So how is this relevant to them moving forward? That was a lot of information that we just went through in just a couple of minutes. So I want to pause for just a minute to see if anyone has any questions on how to more effectively analyze their audience to cater their message. Okay. All right, not seeing any questions just yet. So I told you that there were four pillars. The second pillar of effective communication is delivering the right message. Delivering the right message. Now, oftentimes, whenever I work with teams, there is one overarching word that can be that can inhibit our communication, especially within the nature of the work that we are talking about today, and that is jargon. How do we effectively communicate jargon? There's this idea that jargon can be detrimental to our communication, but it's important to be mindful of the fact that jargon, in essence, in its core use, is meant to actually enhance our communication. If I'm speaking within my immediate team, then we may have shortcuts to communication, which is jargon, right? We may have our shortcuts to communication to more effectively and more efficiently communicate our message. If we're going through a ransomware within our team, then I don't want to have to communicate or to have to explain what ransomware is every single time that I'm speaking within my immediate team. We're going to use these shortcuts within credential stuffing, within a data breach, within any sort of risk that we are assessing within the team, without having to fully explain and use more words every single time. I want you to know that jargon has a place, and jargon has a powerful use within our teams. They are shortcuts to communication so that we can be more efficient in the way that we are communicating. This is great. The challenge is whenever we are communicating with people outside of our team, in which case, how do we effectively communicate jargon? Whenever I am clarifying my message, I want to summarize whenever I am speaking up right? So if I'm speaking to the C-suite, they don't need to know all of the jargon, all of the words. I'm going to summarize and give them the exact information that they need to make an informed decision. If I'm speaking to the overall organization, I probably don't need to explain all of the intricacies of, of our security measures, but I do need to summarize into action steps for my team. Now, whenever I'm speaking directly within our immediate team, that's whenever I'm going to expand. I'm going to give more information because every bit of that information is going to directly impact them. Whenever I am looking at jargon, the first thing that I am going to do is simplify. So rather than using a lot of words, I'm really going to be intentional, being mindful of the fact that only a certain amount of information is really going to stick. And so we want to be intentional to find the bit of information to simplify our message, to get that bit of information that we want to stick within the minds of our organization. The second thing I'm going to do is I am going to craft my message in a way that is action focused. Several years ago, I used to be a lifeguard for many years. I was a lifeguard, and we noticed that while we might put on the sign no running, if we're seeing someone running, we simply say walk. Why? Well, because there might be some people that says, I'm not running, I'm skipping, I'm hopping, I'm doing something else, right? What we want to do instead is say walk. Rather than give a full explanation of what a phishing email is, what it all entails, all of the action steps that could be taken. Instead, simply give an action step, which could be report it, right? Report phishing emails, right? So this is what a phishing email looks like. Here you are, report it, right? Now we have two very clear messages. I know what a phishing email looks like. I know to report it. I have the action step. So we're going to simplify that message, and we're going to be action focused in the way that we are communicating to our team. Now, that is for overall communication, everyday communication within the jargon of our team. But sometimes we have a bit more complex jargon that we assess. So in these situations, I rely heavily on storytelling, using stories that are outside of the specific realm, right? So I'm going to first begin by telling a story that is not necessarily security related or cybersecurity related. It could be in terms of someone stealing my purse, right? So here I have an image that everyone can relate to. So I'm going to use some storytelling. I might share this story in an overall way. So notice I gave an example earlier of giving action-focused statements. The first story that I gave was about being a lifeguard. Now, that's not related to security at all. But the second story I told was related to phishing emails. Here, I told a larger story, and then I was able to draw a clear line for the individual to have an image in their head, right? So we're going to use these stories to build a relationship, to build that connection with the ideas. And we're going to start very large and then build the connection directly to what you're talking about. So we're going to use this storytelling. A second tool that you can use is to use comparisons. Now, comparisons are somewhat like storytelling, but they're more simplified, right? So here you're getting very, you're getting very specific. Let's use a couple examples. All right. Let's see here. I have a couple examples here. What would you compare? We're going to use a comparison. Use the chat and tell me, what is a good comparison to credential stuffing? What else would this look like? If I have to explain this to somebody in my organization, what would be a quick 5 words or less that I can use? I'm not going to give you the answer. I'm going to give you the opportunity to use the chat and give an answer up in here, or up in the chat. So as we've done this with different teams, we have heard of different analogies to make comparisons for people to actually draw that clear connection for other individuals, right? So credential stuffing was a good example. Sometimes we'll say encrypted emails. I've heard several people compare encrypted emails to IKEA, right? So it takes something and it jumbles it all up like IKEA, and then gives it in a box, and then you have to put it together again, right? So this is something that I have no idea what an encrypted email is. That's a really quick explanation that I can give. So I'm going to use storytelling. I'm going to begin with something that's not related to exactly what I'm talking about, and then draw a clear line. I'm going to use comparisons. Explaining encrypted emails to IKEA is a really quick comparison. I'm also going to use images. Again, images are a powerful, powerful way. You can use images with the data that you're presenting. You can also use it to create an image of what this actually looks like. Several years ago, someone told me that whenever I was younger, someone told me that whenever I hit turbulence in an airplane, it was just like we were hitting speed bumps. And that image stayed very strongly with me. And so today I just got back from traveling, and we hit some turbulence. And in my head, the image that I had was just hitting speed bumps. Now, later on, whenever I was speaking to several of my friends who are aerospace engineers, they were able to give a clear explanation of what turbulence actually is. But the description that they gave was very similar to hitting those speed bumps, right? So I was able to have now the science and the full explanation in addition to the image. And as you are explaining jargon within your team, using these really simple tools is really effective. Now, there's a question that you can ask whenever presenting jargon as well. And that is to simply repeat the word, okay? So whenever you say encrypted email, what do you mean? Now, you and I might have a clear understanding of what that means, but whenever you are speaking to other people in your team or other people in your organization that might have other understanding, I want you to be mindful of this simple question that you can ask. You can also begin with, hey, I'm curious. Starting a sentence with I'm curious is a very disarming statement that you can say. It takes out the possibility to get very defensive or possibly feel put down. So instead, we're going to say, hey, I'm curious. Whenever you are stating that we need this or that this is a challenge, what exactly do you mean? This is a simple question that can lead to big results within your team. So whenever you craft your message, we're going to be mindful of the audience first, being mindful of their baseline knowledge, being mindful of the culture, of the personality. And then we're going to craft our message, being mindful of the jargon and being mindful of the way that we are presenting our information. If you have a lot of data, images is going to be a great way to effectively communicate your message, right? It's something visual that people can see. If you are communicating a message that you are advocating for something, right? So we need more training on on security measures within our team. Then using storytelling is really powerful. Why? Because storytelling not only provides clarity and provides a reference point, but it also can bring out an emotion and an emotional component to our messaging. This is really powerful, right? So we're going to look at the messaging component. All right, so we've analyzed our audience. We have now crafted our message in a way that's really powerful. So one last thing within crafting your message, I begin with why, right? So why should I care? Why is this important? Okay, we're going to begin with that empathy, begin with that understanding, right? So here we're allowing the other person the opportunity to share the challenges that they're facing. They're able to share the emotion. And while you are asking these questions, beginning the conversation with questions, you are essentially getting a pulse check so that you can further analyze your audience and make any last minute adjustments that you might need to effectively communicate your message. So I want to give you a framework. So we're going to start with empathy, right? Start with understanding, asking questions, getting a pulse check on your audience. The next thing that you are going to do is address what is happening now, right? So you're going to address the facts. This is your point to bring in data. This is your opportunity to really speak realistically about what is happening now. And then you can move forward into the possibility of what can happen in the future, right? So in that initial facts and figures, that is your time to clarify any jargon. That's whenever we're asking, what do they know now? What can they know later? Or what do they know now? What should they know now? Right? So we're addressing what's happening right now, and then we're able to effectively move into that next stage or that next framework of communication, which is addressing opportunities, right? So this is what I would like to implement. This is the course of action that we should take. And here we're being very very strategic in the way that we are presenting this framework of conversation, right? Starting with understanding, moving into the facts and figures, and then moving into opportunities and suggestions. And then you're going to end with the action step, right? So this is what we have decided. This is what we're going to do. Crafting your message can take time, and I encourage you to not do it on a whim. And so many times I'll work with leaders and we spend a lot of time in audience analysis, which is great, but then we have a great understanding of the audience and we haven't taken the time to plan the actual message. And that's what is so critical within our teams, is actually crafting the message. Many times I find that whenever we go into meetings, sometimes we'll spend time actually planning an agenda for the meeting. But within other forms of communication, we don't take the time to plan within the framework of what the goal of our communication is. Is it to inform? Is it to advocate? Is it to increase understanding, right? So we have to look in the same way that we use meetings and we have a framework for meetings, we should be applying a framework to our overall communication. And you might be thinking, Amber, isn't that a little scripted? Could I come off as disingenuous if I am constantly operating off of some sort of framework? But I beg to argue, beg to differ. See, whenever we are beginning with an audience analysis and then intentionally crafting our message, we are being intentional to be mindful of our time and our energy so that whenever we enter into our communication, we are more effective in the way that we're communicating and we're actually meeting our goals. So oftentimes we'll work with teams that say, Amber, we communicate all the time. We talk all the time. But that talking, that communicating doesn't have a real purpose to it. Now, this does take practice. Communication is a skill. And so going through this framework does take time to really go through effectively. But as you do it more, it will become second nature as you are communicating that message. So we're going to begin by that understanding, talk about what's happening now using data, using facts, using figures, and then going into suggestions, and then finalizing an action step. We will use this method of communication on one-on-one performance feedback. We'll also use this method of communication whenever we are speaking to executives of Fortune 500 organizations, right? So this is a framework that can be applied really in any way. So we're really focusing on the what and the why in that initial communication. So that is on our message. The second method, the second pillar of great communication is the way that we are communicating. So this is, I want to ask you a question. Why do you think love letters are so powerful? Why are love letters such an effective form of communication? There's a couple different reasons. The first is that there is an intentional time spent actually actually writing the message. There's time and thought put into crafting the message, and it's something tangible that you can hold. But another reason why love letters are so powerful in their message is that there is a span of time between each correspondence. It's a span of time for emotion to build. It's a span of time for people to digest the information that is being delivered. Now, this is really powerful and desired in a love letter. It is not as desired whenever we are sending emails to our team. And see, many times we spend a lot of time focusing on the audience and on crafting our message, but too often times we forget about the method of delivery. This is oftentimes forgotten. There is a spectrum of delivery methods that we can utilize within our communication. On one end, we have very slow feedback loops. Again, this is the rate of the span of time between each correspondence. That's the feedback loop. So with a love letter, it could be several days, sometimes months between each correspondence. If I am on the phone or if I'm talking to someone face to face, then it is seconds that we are getting that feedback, right? Many times it's simultaneous. And so there is a spectrum. On one side, we have very slow feedback loops. So a memo, an email, a text, right? These can be slower feedback loops. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have in-person, phone call, video chat, right? So these are very fast feedback loops. Now, there is a time and a place for each one of these methods of delivery. But there's three things that I consider whenever deciding the best method of delivery for my message. So first, I look at the complexity. If you are delivering a message that is highly complex, that will likely have many questions, then you want to be on this far end of the spectrum where you are in a position to answer those questions in live time. Because if you have a highly complex situation and there's a lot of questions, there's a lot of ambiguity, that can actually affect the culture, the trust, the anxiety within the team, and the effectiveness of your message. So if you have a highly complex message, you want to make sure that you are using a faster feedback loop. I'm also going to look at the emotion. If I have a highly emotional message, something that somebody might contest, something that has personal impact on the individual, that's going to be highly emotional. And we want to be on this far end of fast feedback loops within our team. And then lastly, I'm going to look at the individual. Right, so there are some people, they want to talk, right? There are some people that they need that fast feedback loop in communication. Within our team in the Pathways group, we are an international team. We have people from all over the world, and we're doing training and development. And there are some members on our team that they desire and they really need fast feedback loops. They have a lot of questions. They want that extra time. to clarify the message. There are other individuals on our team that we can give a really quick message. They'll say, okay, it's noted, got it, done, and then they'll move forward. And it's not that there is one that is bad and one that is not. It's a different preference of communication. So even though the audience is the exact same, they could be the same people, same relationship, same position. The message is exactly the same. I need this done. The method of delivery that I use might be a little bit different. Okay, so so we want to be mindful of our actual method of delivery. If you are in, also sometimes the emotion or the severity of the situation can be communicated with the actual method of delivery. So this can be exemplified literally yesterday. I am currently traveling, and I called my parents, and I called them a little bit later in the day, and I gave them a call, and they answered right away because they go, oh, you never call at this time, right? And so that method of delivery actually sparked some anxiety from it. It actually communicated a severity of a situation. Yeah, so there they knew before I even communicated my message that what I had to say was actually really urgent. And so it actually communicated the severity. So we're going to use that spectrum. Now, the final aspect of communication that we must be mindful of is time. Now, many times whenever people talk about time, they talk about the right timing, right? So having the right EQ skills to read the room. You probably don't want to give a really important message on a Friday afternoon whenever people have one foot out the door, right? So many times people will talk about time, but I want you to also be mindful of the actual time that you commit to communicating your message. Let me explain. If you are at a meeting, if you're in a meeting and you have a very complex or you have an emotional message that you need to deliver, then you should also be mindful to add time at the end or add time right after the message for questions and answers. Saying something that is very important as a side comment can actually be detrimental to the overall communication within your team. So you want to be mindful of the time that you are allowing for the information to digest. You also want to be mindful of the time that you are allowing for the information to digest before implementation. Let me give an example. I was working with one team that decided, one organization, and they were going through a massive overhaul. They were going to do a massive process overhaul. And the leader came in and said, okay, we are going to do this massive process overhaul, and it's going to start tomorrow. Well, the team members had a lot of questions. There was a lot of questions throughout the organization, and it was a pretty emotional process overhaul within the organization. And it would have been a little more powerful, created more buy-in, had the individuals, had the team members known about the process overhaul at least a couple of weeks in advance, rather than saying at the end of a day that the process overhaul was starting tomorrow. This was not an urgent thing. It was something that had been thought of. So we've been working on this for several weeks, actually a couple of months. And but it was not communicated to the organization till the day before rollout. And so we have to be mindful of not only the timing of day, but the time that we're allowing on a micro and a macro level before we are communicating these messages for maximum impact and maximum effectiveness within our team. So I know that we've gone through a lot of information. We didn't have a ton of time today, but I really want to leave you with the 4 pillars of communication. So we have, so whenever you are crafting your communication, I want you to be mindful of the audience, right? Doing an effective audience analysis. I want you to be mindful of your message, being specifically mindful of the jargon, asking not how do we get rid of jargon, first asking, is jargon effective in this situation to this team? And if it's not, how can we better communicate through simplification, using action-focused messages, using storytelling, using comparisons, using images? I want you to also be mindful of the way that you deliver your message. Again, there is a spectrum of communication, and you need to be mindful of the complexity of the message, the emotion of the message, and the actual individuals. And I also want you to be mindful of the timing, not only the time of day, but the time that you are allowing for the communication to happen, the timing from the communication to implementation, and the time that you are spending actually speaking and communicating these important messages to your team. Now, we only have a few minutes left, but we've gone through these methods of communication and these tips and tricks and tools that you can use, hopefully, to improve the communication within your team. But it's important to remember that communication is a two-way street. The way we began by analyzing our audience, the way that we can effectively analyze our audience is by truly listening and effectively listening to our audience. Too often, we can become caught up in what we need to say that we forget that we also need to listen in order to do an effective audience analysis. And so I encourage you to, and I challenge you to be intentional, to reach out to the people within your organization and actually ask meaningful and ask challenging questions. And be prepared to take action based on the feedback that you receive and to cultivate the relationships that you have within your organization. So I think that we have just a couple minutes left. I want to open it up for any questions that we have. I know this was a lot of information that we went through very quickly, but I want to open it up for any specific questions that you may have about crafting your message, delivering your message within your organization.
Can you see the questions in the question box, Amber?
I cannot. I have the chat window open.
Okay, so they're in the question area, not the chat. So I'll just read you one. How to measure the success of communication?
Oh, that's such a great question.
Good.
So yeah, yeah. So I will look at, well, first off, I'll look at mistake. We'll look at error rate, right? So whenever we do have errors, we'll do a debrief and say, okay, why did this happen? What can we do better? And we've worked with some teams that have very high error rates based off of communication, miscommunication within teams. So we'll look at that. We'll also look at completion time within teams, or project completion time within teams. So if it's taking a longer time for us to roll out an initiative or a longer time to complete a project, we'll look at communication opportunities for better communication there. So that's more longitudinal studies, right? So it took us 3 months to complete our projects at this point. Now it's taking us about 2, right? So that's one way that we'll measure that. The third way, honestly, is we will do, there's been a couple teams, there's actually been several teams that will do more communication surveys or communication activities, right? So we'll come into the team and we will do series of communication activities and challenges, and we can then have a baseline, right? So we establish that baseline knowledge so that whenever we come in a couple months later after we've gone through the tools and the tricks, the tools and the resources on how to improve communication, we'll do similar but not the same. We'll do similar challenges and measure that success, and then we'll come back a few months later and measure it again. So that's really the best way. For longitudinal, we'll look at error rate and we'll look at project completion. If we're wanting something that's very concrete, then we will look at very specific challenges and activities that we do within the team. So yeah, unfortunately, that's not something that we have a lot of hard data on compared to other performance metrics.
All right. Thank you so much, Amber. I really appreciate your time. And thank you everybody for attending. Please join me in the next session starting in a few minutes.
All right, thank you all so much. Great to connect with you.